You and your spouse applied for the marriage-based green card and you have an interview coming up. I know you're nervous. That's completely normal. But today, I'm going to go over information that helps you to understand what to expect, what questions they'll ask you, and also the kinds of mistakes that you need to avoid being denied in your case. What happens at the marriage-based green card interview? All right, let's start with the basics. It's usually held at the USCIS local office. You'll get notification and interview notice in the mail, so make sure you have your address up to date and that you check your mail regularly. Because when that interview notice comes, it's going to have a date, the time, the specific address. You need to make sure you don't miss that interview. If your immigrant spouse is outside of the United States, then that interview is going to take place at the nearest embassy or consulate. When you arrive to the interview, the officer is going to swear you in by asking you to raise your right hand. And then after you've sworn to tell the truth, then they're going to jump straight into that interview. They usually start by reviewing your file, reviewing documents, and they jump straight into questions. Now, these questions are meant to focus on whether your marriage is real. So I'm going to go over the most common questions that my clients get asked in these interviews. Here's something to note before we jump into those sample questions. If your case looks suspicious beforehand, that immigration officer is going to be ready to drill you about the parts of the application that really look suspicious to them. He may even schedule you for a second interview, which is called a Stokes interview. If you didn't pass the muster of the first interview, then they pass you on to the Stokes interview. That's much tougher. And being separated and being drilled with even more difficult questions is a certainty with the Stokes interview. But the goal of this video is to give you the kind of information to avoid a situation like this and to get it right in the first interview. Now, let's get to the questions. Here are the most common questions that USCIS officers ask at the interview. Now, they're going to look at your relationship timeline. They're going to look at when did you meet? How did you meet? How did you build your relationship? How did you commit to each other? When did you get engaged? When did you get married? Be sure to sit down and touch base with your spouse. Reminisce about how you met and all the timelines of your relationship, just to make sure that the both of you do have the same memory of the events. Even the realest couples get these things wrong sometimes. So you just want to make sure you don't get it wrong in this interview. Also gonna look at your daily life together. Who usually wakes up first? What side of the bed do you sleep on? What did you have for dinner last night? May ask questions about your finances and your bills. They may want to see updated copies of your joint bank account or other types of joint bills like joint cable, joint utility bills. They may ask who pays what bills. Another area that they often look at are friends and family. They want to know, do you both know each other's friends and family members? Or are you both putting yourselves out there as a married couple to the community? So with that being said, they're going to ask, when and how did you celebrate your last anniversary? What's your spouse's family like? What's your mother-in-law's first name? Here is a pro tip. Don't go into the interview trying to memorize anything word for word. You both know your marriage is real. You just need to go in there with confidence and be prepared to answer these questions. Instead, focus on the memories, real memories, together. Now, here are some red flags that could get you denied. If you and your spouse give different answers, this will most certainly lead to another interview called the Stokes interview. And in some cases, you may get a notice of intent to deny. Now, that notice of intent to deny is basically saying they intend to deny unless you can change their minds with additional evidence that disputes their conclusion that your marriage is not real. So you definitely want to make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page and that you answer questions consistently that you do match at the end of the day, whether you're sitting together or they've separated you. Here's another one. You're not knowing basic details about each other. For example, if the USCIS officer asks that basic question, which should be basic, what's your spouse's birthday? And you take more than a few seconds to try to remember what the birthday of your spouse is, that could lead to suspicions that this marriage is not necessarily real, because which two spouses aren't going to know that off the top of their heads about the birthday of their spouse? Other types of very basic details that you really need to know off the top of your head is your spouse's jobs, your spouse's job routines, your spouse's place of work, your spouse's work address, your spouse's daily task at the job. Here's a big one. From the very start of the application process, you definitely want to be putting those joint documents in your application packet. If you don't, you're going to walk into an interview that may be hostile, because the USCIS officer is not going to see any evidence of joint documents, and they're already going to make their decision about how real your marriage is, which without any joint documents means they're leaning on the side that your marriage is not real. And this is because real marriages usually involve shared finances, joint leases, utility bills together. And that's because as a married couple, you're building a life together. So you are going to commingle your funds in order to meet responsibilities as a new married couple. If you don't have any of these, then it's time to possibly look at alternative evidence. Those could be things like photos, even though photos alone never make or break your case. You need more than photos. Photos are like the cherry on top. It could enhance your case, but with photos alone, it can raise a red flag. But one way to really shore up the evidence would be to have multiple affidavits from friends and family on both sides of the family. So for example, a US citizen could have a couple of their friends and family write affidavits about their observing the good faith marriage and the relationship. And the immigrant spouse could have their friends and family also write affidavits attesting to the fact that they have observed a real marriage. Here's another pro tip. Even if you don't have all of these joint documents, you can still prove your marriage is real. Bring text messages, travel tickets showing you've traveled together, and even receipts from places that you've been together. It's definitely preferable to get those joint bank accounts, but I do understand that every marriage is different and circumstances may not allow you to have joint accounts. In those cases, though, make sure you're really shoring up the other evidence to show your marriage is real. What do you bring to the interview? Make sure you bring these documents. You're going to get an interview notice, and that interview notice is going to be very specific about the kinds of documents that you should be bringing to the interview. Make sure you read your interview notice very carefully and gather all the applicable documents. Here are some examples of documents that are usually listed on that interview notice. But keep in mind that it's always best to look at your notice, and it depends on your circumstances based on what's in your background. That really determines what you need to take. Now, you need to make sure that you have certain original documents and then a copy of those original documents. Sometimes the USCIS officer will want to verify that the document is genuine. They may ask you to look at that document. They're not going to take the originals, but they do want to look at it and feel it themselves, feel the seal sometimes, to make sure that there are no fraudulent documents. So make sure you have an official, certified, or original copy of your marriage certificate. Then bring a copy along in case the officer wants to take the copy for their file. Take your joint lease or your joint mortgage. Make sure that you have updated statements regarding those joint accounts or the joint lease or joint mortgage. If you renewed while you were waiting for the interview, you renewed your lease, make sure you bring that updated joint lease. Joint bank statements and bills. Also, make sure that you take updated copies of any kind of bills that you have together. Now, here's a big red flag. If you submit your application with joint bank accounts, but guess what? The joint bank account has no money in there, that's going to raise a red flag with the USCIS officers. I've seen it time and time again. So, even if, say, you just opened that bank account and then sent in that empty bank statement, the next thing you're going to do is make sure that you continue to document the activities in your joint bank account, your deposits, your withdrawals. You make sure that the joint bank account is active. Don't just give them a bank account with one deposit and no activity. That does raise a red flag. So bring those updated joint bank statements with meaningful activity on the account so the officers can see how the both of you share in financial commingling and how you make sure you work together to pay your bills or deal with expenses. Photos together. Now, for every interview that I've attended with my clients, I tell them to go ahead and put an album together and bring that photo album to the interview. It works pretty nicely because it's organized. The officer can clearly see pictures, and sometimes the officers may have questions about those pictures. It allows them to easily flip through to get through those photos and get through any questions that they may have about those photos. It's not just your wedding photos. That is another big red flag. Now, whenever you have an application and all you have are pictures of a wedding with hardly anybody at your wedding, and if they clearly see that you've just eloped very quickly, then that can raise a red flag. So you want to be careful about not just putting wedding photos alone. They want to see photos with friends and family members and different activities, different holidays, different times. They just don't want to see your wedding alone. And under certain circumstances, if they don't see a lot of people at your wedding, then it can cause them to ask more questions about how real this marriage is, because any two people can run to the courthouse and get married for marriage's sake. They want to know that you're building a life together. So make sure that you're using a broad number of photos to show how you live your life with your spouse, around friends and family, how the both of you go out together and share your time together. Now, text messages, call logs, emails can also be very helpful to show ongoing, meaningful communication between the both of you as spouses. Now, this is especially useful if you're living apart, if your immigrant spouse is outside of the United States, but you talk regularly through WhatsApp, you talk by phone or text messages, or even by email. You need to make sure you print those communications and take them with you to the interview, because even when you're apart, it shows the regular communication and the effort to connect with each other on a daily basis. Now, as I said earlier, just make sure that you bring a copy for every original document that you have. Now, other types of documents you need to make sure that you have are the passport you use to enter the country. That's going to have your visa stamp, and also make sure you have your I-94 record. That's your record of arrival. Make sure you have your valid and current passport as identification. If you were divorced previously, make sure you bring your original divorce decree or a certified copy, and then bring a copy, of course, in case the officer wants to hold on to a copy of the certified or original divorce decree. That's going to be very important, because if the officer has any questions about any previous marriages that you had, You want to make sure to provide that to the officer right then and there so it will not hinder a decision very soon after the interview. Now, here's what to expect on interview day. When you arrive to the USCIS, you want to make sure that you are there at least 15 minutes earlier. Now, you will probably have to wait in your car because they don't usually let anybody in until about 15 minutes before the interview. They are going to have the time that you should arrive on the notice, and they're going to tell you the earliest time that you'll be able to get into the office as well. Pay attention to that. I'm going to go through your security check. Now, if you can, make sure you leave your phone in your car or turn it off. Some officers are really picky about that. And if your phone goes off in the interview, it can cause them to even end the interview and become very agitated at the fact that a phone is ringing. So to avoid any kind of issues like that, make sure you turn off your phone at a minimum. Once you're led into the office, it's usually a small administrative office. So they're gonna take you in. There are usually about 2 or 3 seats in front of the desk of the USCIS officer. The officer sometimes will instruct you where to sit. If you have an attorney with you, they'll have a designated spot for the attorney and then designated spots for the couple, which is usually at the forefront of the desk. They're going to tell you to raise your hand, your right hand, and swear to tell the truth. Now, one thing you should be doing is make sure that you address each question that the officer is going to ask in a calm, polite manner. Now, remember, the both of you can't wait to start your lives together. You should be confident in your relationship and the fact that you can easily show you have a good faith marriage. So don't sweat it. Make sure you have everything organized going into that interview. Don't be fumbling around with papers. Know exactly what documents you have with you. Know exactly where those documents are so that if the officer needs anything, you can quickly reach for it and give it to the officer. No fumbling for papers in that interview, remember. After the officer has asked questions, the officer will indicate whether they're going to make a decision right then and there or whether they need more time. Now, don't panic if the officer doesn't make a decision right there on the spot. That's completely normal. You may get the results within a day, you may get it within a few weeks. Now, if a number of days go by and you don't get correspondence, you can submit a case inquiry. Now that you've listened to this video, I hope you're ready to go in there and succeed in that interview with confidence. If you continue to have questions, go ahead, send us a message or give us a call and schedule an appointment so we can talk through your process with you. Now, this is what we do for our clients. We help our clients through the marriage-based process. We've been very successful at it, and we would love to help you. That's always a safe way to make sure that you get through the process smoothly and successfully. I really hope that this video was helpful. Go ahead, like, subscribe, so that others can see this information that will empower them through their immigration journey. Until next time, take care.